forgive me, I can get a little emotional here. This is after 16 years, my chance to come here and say thank you. So I will do my best to keep the emotions in check. But, I see you as a room full of brain scientists working at the very leading edge of therapeutic intervention. And not just that, but you are capable of giving real people back their lives, and I am one of them. So the book I wrote is called The Ghost in My Brain, How a Concussion Stole My Life, and How the New Science of Brain Plasticity Helped Me Get It Back. I wrote it for two reasons, and I think those of you who see so many patients, you will understand, having gotten better, I was ready to close that door. I had no interest in writing this book, but I thought, you know, I have the notes, I'm a professor, I really need to get this job done. And I had two goals. One was to capture the details of brain injury, the brain injury experience. You know, I had the notes, and I'm a scientific observer. I'm a professor of artificial intelligence and cognitive science. So I thought, well, okay, I'm the guy for the job. And then in service of that, I will try to be a champion for neuro-optometric brain rehabilitation. And I'm not the best guy for that. You know, this is not my area. And yet I'm scheduled to be on a national public radio for an hour and so on. So I will do my best. But I apologize for any mistakes I make along the way. We could ask, are such case studies valid? You know, this is a 12-year case study. Self-reporting case study is the best we could say of it. Well, I am a professor of artificial intelligence in CogSci, trained in a theory of how brains work. I took 1,200 pages of notes over 8 years from the very second day after this crash that gave me a concussion. There was no expectation during all that period that I would ever get better. The clinical tests all were very consistent. We would be having an MTBI. I was told you have a severe concussion. The best neurologists and the leading rehabilitation centers were all in agreement. And I sought out the best, and they were of one mind. You'll see possible terrorist improvement in 1 month, 6 months, a year, and a couple of years. And after that, no one ever gets better. You will not get better. No one ever gets better. Learn to live with your symptoms. And yet, I showed a dramatic improvement within 3 weeks of beginning optometric and cognitive restructuring treatment because of our amazing plastic brains. Debbie Zielinski sitting in the back room. And Lisa Coar, who is sitting here in front of us. I would say that within 3 weeks I was about 70% recovered after 8 years. And then within 2 years, fully recovered. The incident took place in September of '99. I was rear-ended in a car crash while waiting at a stoplight. I was behind 2 other cars. A distracted driver ran into the back of my Mazda. And I drove to work, and I gave a lecture afterward. It was a lecture from outer space, I will say. I couldn't find my car in the parking lot afterward, and it was quite an adventure getting home. I had 3 fruitless trips to the hospital, and I was soon struggling to get through a single day. It was an interesting moment about 3 days after the crash, and I thought, something's wrong. And it was really bugging me. You know, I've been out for 6 hours, and all day it was driving me crazy. I know there's something wrong. So I remember standing in the living room of this house I was rebuilding, and I said, I'm going to figure this out. I said, sweat pouring from my forehead, and my body's trembling, and the pain was intense. And after 15 minutes of trying to keep from throwing up, I finally figured it out. When I got up 6 hours earlier, I put my shoes on the wrong feet. So it sounds like brain injury, yes? All right. Anyway, my symptoms were persistent for 8 years. I was almost fully functional until I had to think, and then I suffered a severe deterioration within minutes. Cognitive capabilities disappeared so completely that it was difficult to realize they were missing, and I think your patients can give you a hint of this. For example, I would lose the ability to turn right, but as we heard this morning, it's not that the right-hand side was black, it just wasn't there. So in my notes, there are no notes that said, I can't turn right. Why? I couldn't conceive of it, but I knew that there was a problem and I approximated it. I had severe inability to initiate action often. For example, I couldn't rise from a chair. I often had to be helped from a room. I could walk upstairs, but I couldn't walk down them. I couldn't pass through doorways. I would have to feel them spatially with my hands as I worked my way through the doorway, trying to figure where my body ended and the rest of the world began. I experienced something I'll call the Dolly Zoom effect. In Vertigo, Jimmy Stewart's hanging from the gutter, or the alley just drops away underneath his feet. Well, for me, that would often happen at times of brain stress, where I would take one step forward and the world would move 2 steps farther away. My goal was disappearing, even though I knew I was getting closer to it. And because of that, I almost froze to death several times after work, crossing Grant Park after an evening lecture when my body just stopped moving. I might find myself standing there for an hour in sub-zero weather, unable to move, telling myself, you're going to die here if you don't move, but there was nothing I could do. I had severe balance difficulties when I began to think. I couldn't take elevators or trains. My visual system, interestingly, had to take over for my damaged vestibular system. There was competition for the scant visual resources that were almost damaged. So if I needed the visual resources to think, my resources to stand up, the visual resources that kept me upright, were no longer available. The result was a loss of balance and intense nausea within 5 minutes of beginning any task requiring visualization, such as just simple thinking. And of course, we don't like to talk about it, but there is significant pain with head injuries. I used to plan when I had to balance my checkbook or work some design on the house I was building. I would go to the 7-Eleven and get bags of ice and bring them back because I knew within 20 minutes I was going to start to reach my limit, and I would have to empty the ice into the bathtub, fill it with cold water, and lie down. And if you stick your hand in the snow, it's not convenient, but it was better than the head and neck pain, and I know your patients will talk about that. I had the complete inability to make decisions. I was perfectly logical. I had good assessment of the decisions as always, but when I would reach inside for that decision to come out of the ether, there was nothing there. I think some of you who, like me, are no longer feeling 20 years old. You try to remember that name, the movie star, the name of that movie, and it's just not there. It feels odd. Well, this was the same kind of thing. I'm ready to make a decision, but none would come. In the most perverse cases, sometimes I would have to tell someone, I'd say, could you please tell me what to do right now? And then they would tell me, and I would have a decision made for me in that way. I had no multitasking ability whatsoever. If I'm trying to get into the car, to organize my 5 kids, with keys, coats, my body would stop immediately. It would freeze up. I could do only one thing. If I stopped to think, do I have my wallet? Everything else just stopped. Here's an interesting design. Donnelly Marcus, who's not an optometrist, but is a cognitive restructuring specialist who worked very closely with Debbie, and was just a wonderful person. I hope you can all meet her someday. When I first went to see her, she gave me this drawing and said, could you copy this from this one page to another 8.5 and 11 sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, and I said, oh, sure, but this is, it's going to be a little bit of trouble for me, so I just want you to know ahead of time. And, I turned in from Professor Jekyll into this, strange Mr. Hyde with my eyes an inch away from the page, crumpling the page up, and I'm just kind of trying to draw. And, in the background, her assistant, Mara, was saying, should I call 911, ambulance, and I said it was only the fact that I was, had the dialogue going on saying, don't worry about it, this always happens, it's normal, that kept her from calling the ambulance to come and cart me away. I had spine, neck, face, arm, back all twisting up and so on, and I'm sure that you've seen that in some of your patients when you give them the wrong task. When I had to draw concentric circles like this, or I noticed it with visual tasks, rotation tasks like two-sided copy, which can be taxing. I would end up with these seizures, like the side-to-side seizures that would last for sometimes up to three days. So I tried to avoid that kind of task. But sometimes, I was working and you have kids, and sometimes there's things that just have to get done. And there might be a library foyer. You're taking your child to the library, and they have those bars out there to get the snow off of your feet. And I can't get over them. My eyes would start up with these seizures, so you can't always avoid that. or this shirt over here. You know, you just pop out of you kind of always trying to hit. One thing I noticed that was very striking that I think is a hallmark of this kind of concussions and difficulties that I had, which of course is a subset of the difficulties that all brain injury patients will have. But in any case, in my case, and I believe this is relatively common, I would score very high on these short cognitive tests the first time. I'll give you 3 things to remember. Can you count back by 7s while you're, standing on 1 foot or whatever? The neurologist, even at my urging, would never repeat the test. But had they done so, I would score near the bottom the second time around. And of course, at the end of even just these simple tests of counting backward by 7, I had head pain, nausea, I was disoriented, I couldn't stand up, and this would happen within even just 5 minutes. I had lots of audio processing difficulties. I couldn't turn speech into meaning because, of course, for most of us, I think 97% is I think isn't that the number, that we're visual thinkers, and when we hear an audio stream, we turn it into the symbols of thinking, the visual symbols of thinking. And I couldn't keep up. So that was quite a difficulty. And being, as a professor, it's my job to give lectures and job talks. I had to be very tricky about sitting near the door because it's not convenient when someone is, a big moment in their life coming to give a job talk and, you run out holding your ears. Doesn't look too good. And if I stayed too long, of course, I couldn't walk anymore. So that was tricky as a professor. And I had extreme phonosensitivity. There's some sort of interesting episodes. I don't know if you remember the Carl's Ray's brakes there, or Ramon's brakes. There were some interesting episodes with these sounds that would leave me in fetal position holding my ears. And that was persistent. It got worse, of course, under brain stress. I had a complete inability to plan. I'm sure you've seen this. Time, calendars, sequences, they had no inherent meaning to me at all. When someone would say, I'll meet you at 4:30 on Tuesday, that was a scary thing for me. I'm trying to figure some way to write it down before I lose the ability to listen to what they're saying, because there was no inherent meaning of the sun traveling around the earth, and one day is like the next. And I think part of that was because I retained the cardinality property of numbers, the set of things, but I lost much about their ordinality. And without ordering, you can't get sequence, and without sequence, of course, planning is almost impossible. Pattern matching, this was a nightmare sometimes. The visual pattern matching from, for example, going to stores, trying to shop at Home Depot, or even buy food would just leave me completely debilitated, where I couldn't walk, and I'm clutching the cart, trying to get out of the store, and I would lose that almost complete loss of visual context. And we saw even some of that in the slides earlier today, where you just get the vision. All you can see is just that executive center function in there with no meaning attached to it at all. This leads, of course, to just complete and overwhelming chaos, not just in your life, but internally in your thinking as well. I lost my sensory filters, so this was not a good thing. I couldn't stop incoming sounds and visual patterns, and nor could I stop attempting to process them. So it's this strange, weird life where you can't process them in real time, and you just want it to stop, but you can't. And in fact, my very, very highly talkative and bright 3-year-old, I was a single parent at the time, is the one that almost put me over the edge at the end, because of course she never stopped talking. I couldn't turn it off.